They've been hiding the true answer to this question from us. Why are these doors and windows halfway in the ground? During the early 19th century, strange events were reported worldwide. Cities were being dug out from layers of mud and debris. Buildings were being revealed that were covered to their rooftops in mud. A global cataclysmic event buried entire civilizations, erasing them from history. But here is where it gets rather unsettling. The Tartarian Empire, an empire often depicted in old maps, was an advanced civilization that existed across Europe and Asia. They built architectural marvels, had access to advanced technology, and were able to harness energy from the atmos. The mud flood, many say, was a deliberate attempt to wipe out Tartaria from history, hiding their advanced technology and knowledge. But it gets even darker. Look at the world's fairs of the late 1800s and early 1900s. These elaborate buildings, resembling ancient architecture, were supposedly built in just a few years. After the fairs, they were supposedly demolished. Was this to erase evidence of an advanced pre-existing civilization? The Chicago World Fair in 1893, the Paris Exposition in 1900, and the St. Louis World Fair in 1904. These events showcased magnificent architecture, and on official papers they were apparently built with plaster and wood. Do these look like temporary structures to you? The sudden disappearance of these architectural marvels raises the question, were they remnants of the Tartarian Empire, conveniently disguised as temporary exhibits and then destroyed to hide their origins?
The great world's fairs of the 1800s were some of the most beautiful things that you might ever witness. Many of them were built only to be temporary, and they were destroyed afterwards. Many millions of people attended these events. Not only were they beautiful, but they showcased all kinds of new world technologies, like the telephone, light bulbs. And when you compare these world fairs to modern day building, the question arises, how did they do this with the technology at the time, and how did they do it so quickly? I think if you've seen any construction site, even in the past 80 to 90 years, everything seems to take a lot more time now. I mean, do you think we could build a 600-acre fair or a 1,200-acre fair like here in St. Louis within a matter of a few years? I just don't think it would even be possible. Something has definitely changed, and maybe it's the people.
This don't make sense. You're trying to tell me that they built this in 3 years, and after 6 months, they ripped it down. So the Chicago's World Fair in 1893 is one of the city's most famous and infamous events, often called the fair that changed America. The massive event introduced more than 27 million people to the abundance of modern marvels, elevators, the zipper, cracker jacks, the Ferris wheel, the first voice recorded. The first voice recorded? What? They even had a giant golden statue. Some people say it was solid gold, some people say it was gold-plated, and some people say it was just fake.
What's good, world? The world's fairs were one last time for the people to see the old world of Tartaria. After the world's fairs, they were destroyed, never to be seen again except for in pictures. It is the Great Reset.
Hey, I have a conspiracy theory for you guys. So I don't know if you've ever heard of world fairs, but back in 1893, there was a world fair held in Chicago. And these world fairs were held all over the place, and there's many more just like this one I'm showing you. But the one that we're talking about right now is the one held in Chicago. These pictures you see right now, all these buildings that look like they belong in Europe or Rome or Greece, these Roman-style buildings were all done and constructed in Chicago. There was an exposition called the World's Columbian Exposition, and the narrative is that it was held to celebrate Christopher Columbus's 400th anniversary of finding America. And supposedly they built these buildings in 3 years with $28 million, and it was for a fair that was meant to last 6 months. And then after this fair, these buildings were created to only be temporary. So like that bridge you see, the building in the back, all the statues, every building you see in these pictures were created to be temporary. It just doesn't make sense to me because I was always told that resources were scarce back then. I mean, Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin around these times, and here we are building stuff like this. What's the real kicker is, these are people of horse and buggy. How in the fuck did they carry these buildings? All the material to build them, anyways. Something just doesn't add up to me. If you guys want more information on this, I highly recommend you research the mud flood and the Tartarian Empire and YouTube John Levi. Thanks.
Photos that I'm about to share, and they no longer have to be buried deep in the archives. And for the beginning of these photos, I want to focus on the main theme. The theme being that the building is completed, and they are simply putting scaffolding around the buildings. In my opinion, they are painting these buildings white so that they look brand new, when in reality, they are old and from the past civilization. Here we are told is the government building in the Philippine Exposition. We can zoom in on these guys, and of course they're not doing anything productive. You would think that they could build a better ladder compared to what they supposedly built right next to them. And again, let's switch over to this one, where we are told that this is a construction photo when it's clearly completed. The only construction going on here is the scaffolding. Again and again, people just standing there looking so odd, and it almost looks like they just have a kid here. I mean, look at the detail on top of the columns. It's unbelievable, and I believe that I was correct when I said that they were just painting these buildings. They are not constructing anything. Now let's look down here at the bottom right hand side of this photo. It says right here that these are painters and decorators. They are not building anything like the description says for these photos. And they needed a place to live on site because they were painting all of these old world buildings. They were going to be there for a while. The buildings lasted forever. The paint did not. So they needed to get a fresh coat of paint on there. But when you look at the description of the photo, it says that it's a photo during its construction. So they are clearly lying. Painting is not constructing. It's painting. Two different, completely separate jobs. So these are all from the St. Louis World's Fair that we showed in the intro. The dates are from 1803, not 1903. And it had a mud flood that ripped through the interior of these buildings. So let's take a look at this building from St. Louis. And this is founded and renamed the Varied Industries Building. This is another completion photo that they're trying to say is a construction photo. And I want to zoom in on the top of this building. Can you believe the tech that is on the top of this thing? It's incredible. We have shown the airships in episode 48 and how they connected these flying crafts to the top of these buildings and used them as charging docks. And to be clear, I don't think that the past civilization was limited to just these airships that we have photos of. I think that they had much more powerful vehicles. But let's get back to these photos. Skeptics have said these buildings were just made of wood and very easily constructed, and then that's why they knocked them down. No, the only wood that was being used in this project is for the scaffolding to paint the old world buildings white. The lumber is for the scaffolding, not the actual building. Let's make that very clear. If you've ever gone to one of these buildings, the pillars are pure marble. They're not wood. You can use the Field Museum as an example, located in Chicago. And now here we have another incredible construction photo, where for some reason, there isn't much construction going on, just a building with more scaffolding. So my question is, how have they gotten away with this nonsense for so long? That is not construction. I can clearly see that the building is done. Just because someone put a ladder in front of it doesn't mean this is being constructed. This is the process that painters use. Any painter will confirm this. And also imagine carrying these materials up that scaffolding. If this was really a construction photo, it would be impossible and very embarrassing because nobody would be able to do it. Does anyone see a crane anywhere? No. Once you know, you know. You don't go back to believing in the lies because they are ridiculous. We have more tech in the background here. There are two of them actually. And here we have a bunch of people that found this building. Let's take a second and look at the size of this thing. This was the Palace of Electricity. Could you imagine this being constructed today? This thing is unbelievable. And remember, there were so many of these buildings being thrown together in like 2 years supposedly, at the same exact time. Oh, and they are all dated 1803, not 1903. And what happened to the Palace of Electricity? We were told that these buildings were practically worthless, and they ended up in dump sites because they were just made of wood, right? The problem with that is that they are contradicting themselves. The Missouri History Museum states that the construction for the Palace of Electricity and Machinery costed them $412,000, which is the equivalent to $11.48 million today in 2023. So it's practically worthless, or is it 11.4 million? This is the kind of stuff that makes me fully trust the mainstream narrative. I love just knowing deep down that they would never lie to us. It's just really nice to know. I love that they provide us with full logistical details. They never contradict themselves. They go that extra mile to make sure that what we are being told is exactly what happened. Oh, they don't do any of that? No, they don't do any of that. Literally none of it. The title states that this is the Iowa State Pavilion construction. And if you just shut your eyes right now, you can clearly see them right there laying the cornerstone. Okay, you can open your eyes now. This is the master builder down here. And those guys up there were also fully trained on how to build massive palaces. In fact, they are admittedly self-trained, getting a lot of their architecture designs and ideas from working on Abe Lincoln's house. As you can see, they were very busy workers. They got that building done in less than 2 years, ready for the world to see. Temporarily, of course, before knocking it down, so that nobody would ever see it again. And we can't forget to mention that they have painters actually painting this building. 4 of them to be exact, proving again that these are not construction photos. They are painting photos. And over on the right-hand side of this photo, we can clearly see a construction process happening, putting the scaffolding together with perfection. Just look at that scaffolding architecture. Okay, I'll be done with the sarcasm for today. The mainstream narrative is so ridiculous. It's really hard to not make fun of it at this point. And then we have more painters. He's got his paintbrush in his hand and the paint right there on the scaffolding. So it's pretty clear at this point that these are no longer allowed to be considered construction photos for anyone that ever had a doubt in their mind. Now he's holding up a hat, and that hat says something on it. I wish I knew what it said. Comment below what you think that hat says. All answers are accepted. The guy next to him is also wearing a top hat, which is, of course, if you're going for the productive painter / I still want my style points look, very common for the 1900s. Very impressive. And here we have the United States Fisheries Building during its completion. But I'm going to zoom in on this building on the right-hand side because it's very strange. And we have these creatures' faces on the side of this building, with writing here as well. I can't see exactly what it says, but it definitely doesn't say Fisheries Building. And then we can see more painters up here on the left-hand side. And here we have a modern fisheries building. Built by us, of course, which won't last forever, unfortunately, because that's the way we construct things. So here we have a fisheries building that is designed by the Greek gods. And we are told that this is a separation of 100 years. But we are evolving and advancing, when in all honesty, that's the complete opposite. More and more people are realizing that the mainstream history that is written down by some random individual that was never even there and is being told what to write is a joke. Anyone that is seriously backing the regurgitated nonsense at this point and is serious about it should be very careful what they hope and believe in, because I have a lot more on the way that is going to rip their history books apart.
Let's question history. The 1893 Chicago World Fair, also known as the Columbian Exposition. It took place over an area of over 690 acres and was up and running for 6 months from May to October of 1893. And just look at the beauty of it. Wow. It truly looks more like it could be Rome or Athens. Good time to mention that they built all of this in less than 3 years, including all the canals, the lagoons, the statues, the parks, the bridges, the walkways, and of course the over 200 buildings. Now, all of this was deliberately built to be temporary. They don't look that temporary to me. Only 5 buildings of the fair stand today. One of them is the Palace of Fine Arts, which was rebuilt with permanent materials in 1933. Which gets me to think, how does a building that is designed to be temporary and last 6 months stand for 39 years and is then rebuilt in permanent materials in a year? How? Of the other 4 buildings that survived, one of them is still in Chicago. The other 3 buildings were somehow transported to Brookline, Blue Mounds, and Poland Springs. How? Well, how in general is the only question I have in mind looking at all of this. There's also electricity. In 1893, this entire fair was lit up. So the one question I have really is, how did we do that? And were those buildings possibly there before? I honestly don't know what to say. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I'm just puzzled.